Folks, this is all the fruit. Today I'm gonna be foraging in the sandy areas around Mannheim in Germany. Mannheim is very close to Heidelberg. Actually, Heidelberg is at the foothills of those hills there. But as you can see, Mannheim, it's in an extremely flat area. Yeah. So long straight lines. Not much terrain except on railroads and roads where there are artificial hills. And this area is also very sandy. It's gonna be a short video because I don't have a lot of storage space. But since I saw how little fruits we have in Heidelberg now in early November, I wanna see how it is here around Mannheim. Let's start with this little private garden. I see a couple apples on this young tree. The palm tree is in a pot, that's for sure. It's a Washingtonia. Or actually, no, it could actually be a Trachycarpus. It could also be growing outdoors. Actually, there are at least two of them, it seems. Well, anyways, apples. I was very hard pressed to find apples in Heidelberg. They have all rotted away. November is actually apple harvesting time in our area, but no apples in Heidelberg. A lot of walnut trees over there in front of this church and the nearby houses. Also feral walnuts here along the railroad. A fig tree, or rather a giant fig shrub. When I was young, figs used to freeze back every 1 to 2 years. And so most of the fig trees, the last time they froze back was like 10 years ago. So most of them are still shrub-like. Well, when I go back, too lazy to forage those. They are hanging over the fence, but nope. Because the climate in Mannheim is much more continental than in Heidelberg. It's much more dry and windy, like a steppe climate. It's much hotter summers and colder winters. So a much rougher climate. But the stuff that grows here is quite similar. Cherry plums. Yesterday I still found a couple edible fruits near Heidelberg. Hawthorn. The Central European species are small and not tasty, but they usually persist throughout the winter, so a good fruit for foraging in winter and even spring. Rose hips. Those are not ripe yet. A lot of them ripened very early in summer and rotted away. Here you can see the rotten ones. But still there are a lot which are not ripe, which will get ripe later. Let's see what else we have here. Some fox grapes here near this little shed. Yeah, fox grapes have the big advantage. They grow in most climates and you don't need to spray them. Very useful stuff. Hazelnut bush. Somebody here has animals. Sounds like sheep. Oh no, it's a goat. Sorry, I'm bad at foreign languages. Actually, here they've had a lot of interesting animals for decades. A couple decades ago they even had a heron and a couple other interesting fowl. Yeah, be quiet or I'll forage you. Lots of hawthorn next to this little trash pile. Some grapes here. They look like Oberlin, but no fruits. Unlike in the hills near Heidelberg, where open habitats are being overgrown quickly because nobody wants to work the land, here open land is quite common, except in the forest, which are the sandiest soil. Here the soil is sandy, but not too sandy, so big open fields, large-scale agriculture. And here, abandoned plots like this one are kind of rare, and so a valuable habitat for animals that need shelter and also for plants that don't like large-scale agriculture. It's also a good place for foraging. Lots of hawthorn, cornel cherries, some tiny ornamental rose. It's not so valuable for foraging, but this one here is something from the Canine group. Most fruits already ripened. starting to rot, but incredibly tasty. They basically taste like cranberries, only that cranberries like the itching powder in the middle. Yeah, also on this plot I have foraged a lot of feral plums, a lot of feral cherries, a couple apples and walnuts. Not only a wonderful natural habitat for edibles. Here, by the way, cherry plums, feral cherry plums. This is some strange, this is a Produce Mahalep, also edible cherries, but everything is out of season, of course. Yeah, not only can you find a bigger diversity here than on most other plots in the flatlands, but also, who's gonna stop you? Who's gonna complain that you are picking a couple fruits from a plot which has apparently been abandoned decades ago? Probably this walnut and maybe the big cherry tree are the only ones remaining from the times of agriculture. And this little plant tree here could be feral, but it's also out of season. Orchards like this one here exist and have existed here for thousands of years, but there are no large scale, there are no thousands of small commercial orchards like there used to be in the Heidelberg area a couple of decades ago. Guess why? Well, it's because of the harsher climate here. The winters, actually sometimes the winters can be quite mild, but the spring, the late frosts are the problem. If it wasn't for the late frost, this area would totally dominate German fruit production because it has the warmest climate, but the spring frost. Sometimes we had no frost almost all winter, and then in spring the ground froze solid, and of course also the flowers and everything. Here, by the way, a potato field, and look at that. You could forage a lot of potatoes there. The green stuff, when they're exposed to the sun, to the light, is toxic, but you just make the peels a little bit thicker. It's not so toxic that eating the inside of the potato will kill you. It is so toxic that you should probably peel the potatoes a little bit thicker than usually. Here somebody sowed a lot of plants as fertilizer. You can find a lot of interesting edible, forageable stuff in such plots. Here different brassicaceae. Well, what else? Don't see much here. Most of the stuff is already gone. But basically in spring, summer and well into autumn, and sometimes even in winter, depending on the weather, you can forage a lot of stuff here. Nice little mustardy fruits. And here is calendula. You can actually use it as a saffron substitute. So yeah, you can find a lot of stuff on such plots which are they're basically fallow, but they are still being worked, so they're not really fallow, they're being sown with stuff to improve the soil. A wonderful shower in hot summer days. Summers here get really hot. Potato harvesting machine must have been in trouble here. This row alone could feed a man for a year. Not exactly sure if this is considered theft. If fruits are lying on the ground and there is no fence around, you can pick them up after the 10th of November, so not yet. Somebody has obviously been in this field, probably foraging the potatoes. A little bit late. Most of the potatoes are being chopped up as you can see. So if you wanted to forage them a couple weeks ago, would have been the right time. You can still get a lot of good stuff. You just have to peel those little potatoes a bit. You just have to make thicker peels. Yeah, a lot of people have been here foraging. See all the traces. Nobody goes voluntarily to such a muddy thing. Those have been lucky foragers who found all those potatoes. Look here, those are not even that green. A couple of Eastern European people, old ones, came out of the graveyard, started pointing towards the potatoes. Yeah, as these Europeans, we will not pass over an opportunity to do some roadside foraging. Oh yeah, all of them, the whole group are standing next to the potatoes and discussing them. Not gonna film them. I don't want anybody to sue them or something. As I said, I don't know how legal it is. I totally approve of people collecting those potatoes, but I don't want to show them. The young wheat or something else here is also totally edible, but of course you shouldn't trample around on the field and collect this stuff. Well, because it's gonna diminish the farmer's profit. What I totally approve of is this stuff. Don't even know if I can say the name. Well, it's basically rapeseed. Usually very nice and mild stuff in spring. Now still surprisingly mild and tasty. Yeah, good stuff. Is this all? Is this all young rapeseed? Sometimes they also use the radishes to fertilize and improve the soil. So sometimes, at random times of the year, you can forage radishes from random fields or vineyards. This stuff is good. The young stems in spring are even better, but the leaf stalks are also pretty good. Well, in earlier years somebody would have harvested all those cobs of corn. The harvest was pretty bad due to drought, so I guess they just plowed everything under. In earlier years they wouldn't have done this. There's still a lot of edible, or fodderable cobs of corn there. Another edible brassicaceae, Capsella bursa pastoris. The archaeologists who claim that this plant on fallow fields was an important food source for thousands of years. Here an abandoned orchard, and here fruit trees in the middle of fields, an asparagus field, and also here they also have planted something as a fertilizer in between. Could those be radishes? It's some brassicaceae. That means it's toxic. The mustard taste is mildly toxic, but still edible. I think those are some radishes, but they haven't formed the radishes yet. If we get a mild winter, they'll form them over the winter. German asparagus fields have those little hills, because the Germans are very fond of white asparagus. White asparagus is not the asparagus albus the Italians are foraging. White asparagus is normal asparagus officinalis, which is covered with this soil in order to remain wild and tender. The taste is less strong and more tender than of green asparagus. However, this asparagus officinalis is becoming feral in sandy areas in Germany where it's being grown on a large scale, like around Mannheim. And so there are actually people who are foraging it in the wild. I've also foraged it a lot in previous years. So the Germans, yeah, they do forage asparagus, but not the same as the Italians, at least not in the wild. And also not in cultivation. Italians eat green asparagus like most of the world. Germans prefer white asparagus. Halloween's over, but the pumpkin stalls are still standing. Let's see what we have here. Bottle gourds in lots of different shapes and sizes. Those were harvested a little bit young. If you want to make a bottle, yeah, this was the main source of bottles in temperate climates for thousands of years. You need them to ripen. Then you cut off the lid, scrape out the seeds. You have a bottle. either a very thin bottle or a very thick bottle. You can also eat the young ones. I would say those are too old to eat and too young to make sturdy bottles. Here, a lot of those crazy super bitter African or Arabian cucumbers. Those are a lot of different species. They are very bitter. If you plant them in your garden, you will get, even your normal cucumbers will get bitter, but they are being used as ornamentals. A lot of different pumpkins. Look at that. This, what is this, a snake gourd? Could be a snake gourd or a very long bottle gourd. A couple decades ago we had a very little diversity of pumpkins in Germany until somebody started selling those seed packages with like sometimes 50, 70, 80 different pumpkin varieties. Now we got a lot of them. Oh, those could be, they look like bottle gourds, but those could be those very useful pumpkins which they like so much. Well, they like much thicker ones in the Canary Islands, in Bulgaria also much thicker ones. In Italy they grow these thin ones, a trombonete, very tasty one. A lot of other pumpkins. They should reduce the prices after Halloween. Let's see. Strange. 50 cents for this Hokkaido, but 180 for this Hokkaido. Doesn't make sense. But I might buy some a little bit later. I kind of like Hokkaido, and 50 cents a piece. Well, the flesh will be thin, but still. Horse riding is incredibly popular here. Actually throughout all of Germany, but the Mannheim Heidelberg area has so many of those horse farms. Actually there are more, a lot of people say that there are more horses now than in the time when they were necessary for agriculture. Not sure if this is true. Here some, what is this? Is this a cotoneaster? Yeah, some sort of dark fruited cotoneaster. Most of the fruits are completely rotten. Actually all are completely rotten. Oh, actually this one could still be good. Right inside. Edible, but nothing special. So many fields have been sown here with brassicaceous fertilizer. Look at that. Look at that. As far, almost as far as you can see. Everywhere here in the foreground, also in the background. Also a couple sunflowers in between. This stuff not only improves the soil, it's also quite edible. And yeah, here the radishes I've been talking about all the time. See, too late for harvesting. It will be too woody because the stem is already coming out, but a sizable radish. Yeah, nobody will harvest those radishes. Here another good one. This is probably still quite harvestable. Nobody will harvest them. They'll plow them under just to improve the soil. You have to work a lot to improve sandy soil, and you have to work constantly. Sandy soil is swallowing up your fertilizer and giving nothing back. This one could still be totally forageable. Good sized radish. The real reason I'm here is that there are orchids growing in this old sand pit. And some of them are already coming out, and I'm taking care of them for the county. However, seems that somebody has built their fort on top of my orchids. Somebody had the clever idea to plant a cottonwood plantation here in this sandy soil. Didn't work out well, but at least the honey mushroom is happy. This is a mushroom that is very important for, well, was very important for human sustenance throughout the northern hemisphere, and still is in Eastern Europe. I remember my grandfather, basically it was the last mushroom you would forage in our area, and he would forage huge amounts, backpacks full of it, and make preserves. And that's going to be like at the end of the year, when everything else is harvested and all the other mushrooms are foraged, you basically calculate how much of the honey mushroom you need, in order to make it through the winter. And because they grow in those big clusters, you basically take the whole cluster at once. Those are a little bit on the old side, but still totally edible. They are still good. Those here, however, well, in a survival situation I would eat them, but in a normal situation I would stick to those. Usually there was a giant amount of those mushrooms in autumn, so that you could harvest as many as you actually needed. They are not very highly priced. They even sell them here in our student canteen for mushroom. They make mushroom dishes from them. That shows you how cheap they are. But yeah, basically a good thing. At the end of the year you calculate how much more food you need to make it through the winter. And when most other things are not harvestable anymore, usually those come up after frosts. After the first frost, and after the first frosts most things stop growing. Then you forage as many as you need from those, and you make it through the winter thanks to this mushroom. Also, some claim that this is the biggest, one honey mushroom is the biggest organism on earth. However, others say that there is actually an aspen tree which is bigger. If you wonder why a small aspen tree or a small honey mushroom is bigger than a blue whale or a sequoia tree, well, they're connected underground. All the honey mushrooms in one area, and sometimes also all the aspen trees in one area are one individual. Here, by the way, the feral asparagus, very small plant. Okay, it was cut down this year twice, but if it was bigger, it would be totally good for foraging. Well, not now, but like in April or May. And here are some still quite young honey mushrooms. Yummy. Another very important fungus for foraging historically in our area is the horse's hoof mushroom or horse hoof fungus. It grows on trees. Well, also the honey mushroom grows on trees, but usually on rotten roots of trees or on the rotting bases of stems. But the horse hoof mushroom, here we have a couple very tiny babies. Usually you would forage them when they are like 10 times the size. It's not edible, but it was very important as fire starter. It's very important for tinder. Basically, when you have a spark, you can ignite some stuff like cattail fluff or charcloth or other things, but they would not. Well, charcloth would go on for quite a while, but cattail fluff or a lot of the other really fluffy stuff, they would go on for 1 or 2 seconds and then they start going out. Horsehoof mushroom, as I said, this is a tiny one. There used to be a lot of big ones near the ground. Cannot see them anymore. Well, yes, they are gone. Here is a smallish one, but already decent sized one. Well, if you take the dry flesh of this fungus and put a spark into it, it will last for hours. I've made the experiment myself. It lasted for hours, and I biked over 10 kilometers through Heidelberg with a little sliver of such a fungus. They were very important since the Stone Age for fire making, and actually this area around the Rhine was and still is an area where they're very common, but in the mountains around here they are very rare. So people would go into the forest, break those things off and transport whole cartloads of those things to the mountain areas. And this was the standard fire starter. You would basically soak them with salpeter from, basically you would collect pea, boil the pea down, soak those things or cover them with dried up pea, which will make them burn even better. But yeah, folks, this was the standard tinder in Central Europe and in large parts of Europe and temperate areas for millennia, and historically, commercially very important fungus. Of course, this soft dead wood is also a feast for woodpeckers. They can really easily get in here. I mean, see, you can even break it open with your fingers. And in such soft wood, after the woodpecker is done, other animals with claws or teeth or weaker beaks can come and extract more grubs. And of course the woodpecker and also countless other animals use those woodpecker holes for sleeping and nesting and overwintering and so on. Actually in Germany it's illegal to cut down trees with woodpecker holes. Actually there was quite a big scandal here when they cut down a lot of those trees 15 years ago. Not because of the trees, but because there were so many woodpecker holes inside. And if you think that foraging for grubs is something that only animals do, or maybe the pygmies in Central Africa or the people of Southeast Asia, even the Romans, for the Romans, those grubs living in wood were a very valuable and very highly priced delicacy. And actually I've broken open stumps by accident which were full of dozens or maybe hundreds of finger-sized grubs, so really a lot of fat and protein. So yeah, dead trees, very interesting habitats, and if you like it or in a survival situation, or if you are not in Germany because here it's illegal, you can actually break them open with an axe or whatever and extract lots of tasty grubs. Here we have similar blackberry species as in Heidelberg. Here the blue blackberry, Rubus idaeus, out of season, no more blackberries on it. The invasive Armenian blackberry can grow to gigantic sizes like along the railroad. Here in the forest it's a little bit subdued by competition by the trees. Here we also have something that looks like a native blackberry. Not sure which one it is. If you are lucky, you can find seeds, you can find fruits on all three species, even in November, but very few fruits and they will not even be tasty. Young chestnut trees. Actually, around Mannheim, chestnuts are less common, probably because the winter here, historically, the winters here were not so mild. Here a chestnut leaf on the ground. Here a young chestnut tree. When I lived in Mannheim, yeah, it was kind of possible to forage chestnuts in Mannheim, but it was kind of difficult. Yeah, as you can see, very few trees around here. In Heidelberg there would be a lot more chestnut trees. Yeah, the climate down here was a bit too harsh before the climate change, possible for chestnuts, but not ideal. Also in the mountains behind Heidelberg the climate is too harsh. Just between the lowlands and the mountains there is a strip of quite good climate for the chestnut. You can see this tree is not doing well. I don't know. I think, what was it, chestnut blight or something was introduced to Germany from the Mediterranean. Or was it chestnut, they call it chestnut cancer around here. Couple decades ago, and I was involved in the measures for containing it. The measures failed. I don't even think I'm allowed to say whose incompetence caused this. And yeah, now a lot of the chestnut trees, especially the older ones, are very sick around here. Well, this one, maybe not even chestnut, but it's a little bit too young. It's too young for this. I guess it's the dry sandy conditions. Actually, here in the pits, it's not even just sand. They used the sand to cover a lot of rubble and trash and yeah, who knows what kind of trash which they buried here in the pits and then covered them with sand for it to look natural. Here you can see how bountiful, how plentiful the horsehoof fungus is around here. But somebody, I think the woodpecker has extracted larvae from the fungi. Yeah, as I said, they used to be collected around here by the cartload and transported to the mountains where they are very rare. Black locust, another very invasive tree around here. The fruits are toxic, but the flowers are edible and very tasty, and actually a staple for foragers throughout Europe and Asia where it's invasive, and I guess also in its native North America. Interesting. I didn't expect to see that here. Somebody has been using a machete or something like this to break through the thicket recently. I would expect something like this rather somewhere in the Borneo jungle, where those are important trail marks. Well, actually they are not so useful because hunters would leave them everywhere where they want to go. Don't even think this was a hunter. This was somebody playing around. Huh. Interesting. Were they just... probably they did not even have a machete, but some big hunting knife, or maybe still a machete. Would be funny if they are still here. Well, two can play that game. I have a small machete with me because I also need to remove invasive and other shrubs around the orchids, but I guess I'm a little bit better at it than the guy who passed through here. Yeah, sometimes you find funny people, and yeah, sometimes when they have a little weapon on them, they can get a little bit cheeky. Usually they stop being cheeky when they realize that you are here for work, and actually, because you're here for work, you have more weapons with you. You are not allowed to carry something like this in Germany as a private person, but since I'm here for my job, this is different. So if you have a good professional reason to carry something dangerous like a chainsaw or a gun or a knife, you're allowed to do this in Germany. Since I'm here and I have a job from the county which includes managing invasive flora, including invasive shrubs and trees, I can have some sort of hatchet, machete, chainsaw, or some other tool. I cannot have a gun because I don't have a hunting or guarding permit, or I'm not here in wildlife meaning game animals management. I'm just in plant wildlife management. Approaching the next road. Now I just have to get through the last cordon of brambles. Since I knew that foraging would be very bad, I brought a nashi pear with me. Very tasty East Asian pear, which is getting quite popular in Europe. Unlike the European pears, which are supposed to be soft and sweet, the nashi pear is supposed to be crunchy and watery. Oh yeah, and this is an area which is very popular for illegal trash disposal. By the way, if you're wondering, this piece of forest, I've been responsible for it for close to 30 years now. Well, I wasn't responsible in the beginning. 29 years ago I started caring for the orchids and became officially responsible for it like 15 years ago. But you find people using it for crazy things. One summer during the worst drought I saw a big campfire here, and once somebody had stolen a lot of tobacco leaves on the nearby fields. Back then tobacco was still quite a common crop around here. Now it's almost gone, and was drying them on the trees. And once somebody even disposed of his inflatable life-size three orifices doll around here. Also, if you want old bathtubs and fridges and whatever, this is the place to look for. By the way, if you notice here, we don't have sandy soil. It's actually a lot more clayey. It's a bit reddish. It has a lot of rounded pebbles here. This is sediment from the Neckar River, which comes from behind those mountains. Well, basically, 50 meters further up, there is the sandy sediment, which are actually old sand dunes from the Ice Age, sediment from the Alps mountains, which the rain brought down, and then later the winds dispersed. Here you can actually see a little bit darker soil, very well fertilized sand, very few pebbles and not so red. 10-15 meters further away. So this red stuff here, which is 10-15 meters, so like 30 to 50 feet away from me, is Neckar sediment from those mountains, from behind those mountains mostly, Well, the black stuff here is sand, which is actually more yellowish from the Alp mountains, but I guess this sand has been fertilized quite well. That's why it's more blackish. There is a lot of humus in it. Why am I saying this? Well, this area of the red hole was actually for centuries very famous for very rare plants which you couldn't find in the rest of the area. The sandy area is also famous for very rare plants which you basically find a couple hundred or a couple thousand kilometers further east in the steppes. Also for agriculture it's very important what type of soil you have. That's why a lot of people say those big fields, they are not so good. Different soil, different elevation, different hydrology. You harvest the stuff at different type of year. You should harvest the stuff at different type of year, and you should plant different type of stuff there. But with those giant fields, actually, people don't get perfect crops. And of course, it's also more or less important for foraging. Not that important, because the most common stuff which you usually forage will grow everywhere. But still good to know what soil you are foraging on, because there are always some nuances. Here, for example, somebody has foraged the turnips and left behind the ones which were cracked. See? Even cut around with a knife in those turnips. I'm sure they took home a couple of the good ones. Farmers don't like this. I mean, yeah, they are not going to harvest anything from this field, but still, it's their property. And if people try to collect stuff from here, they will also start to collect stuff which the farmers want to harvest. For example, somebody might think those beautiful sunflowers, I can harvest them here, I can bring them home. The farmer doesn't need them anyways, but the farmer needs them kind of for fertilization, and also if you buy them in a flower shop, they will cost you money, so they're actually a valuable commodity. A wild millet, relative of sorghum. Was it millet? Yeah. Theoretically you could eat those seeds, however be careful with wild grass seeds. A lot of them are infected with fungus and stuff. That's why even with giant grass seeds people used to feed them to the chickens, not to themselves, because it's a difference if the chicken dies or if you die. Here a linseed plant. Linen used to be made from the stem, and actually there were areas in Germany, and there are still areas in Russia which are not yellow like those rapeseed covered areas in Germany, but which are blue. Actually an old expression in Germany for going on a road trip is ins Blaue fahren, to drive into the blue, to drive into the areas where the beautiful linseed fields are. Yeah, linen used to be made from this, now it's mostly made from cotton. But there are also a lot of other uses of this plant. Well, a lot. Basically, you can take the seeds, make linoleum from them, make an oil which is not digestible by most organisms, and you can use it to make linoleum, which is something not like a plastic cover for your floor or your table, but a natural, non-digestible cover for your floor or your table. Or you can use the oil for cooking. Since it's non-digestible, basically you don't get fat from this oil. However, I don't know how healthy it's indeed. Also, you can eat the seeds. They seem to, the residue, the stuff which is not the oil, seems also to be very healthy. And when you extract oil, you can feed the residue to animals. In Heidelberg, there is a true story. Towards the end of World War II, a ship was sunk somewhere near Stuttgart, and this ship on the Neckar River was loaded with this linseed oil. And back then, the German rivers were horribly polluted because industry was horribly dirty. Still, people were starving after World War II when they were occupied. Well, here they were occupied by the Americans. They were not starving as badly as the ones occupied by the British, or the French were even worse, or the Russians. The Russians were even worse. There even more Germans were starving, or the Poles. The Poles were just kicking out all the Germans. So here they were occupied by the Americans, but they were still starving. Which is kind of a bit of karma, because before that Germany had starved all of Europe for 5 years because they extracted all the food from the occupied areas, and Germany was the only country eating well in Europe during World War II, but after World War II they were starving. And so those huge chunks of fat were floating down the Neckar River. There must have been, couple thousand tons of linseed oil, which kind of solidified and, of course, absorbed all the pollutants and other stuff which was in this dirty river, where even the fish, I guess, were not doing very well. And it had no nutritional value, but people here still would forage for this Neckar fat, for the so-called Neckar fat. They would collect it and use it to fry different things because, well, who cares if it's toxic? Who cares if it has no nutritional value? I can have fried potatoes of fried meat or fried fried leather shoes, and it will taste really nice and oily and fried. So this was just an anecdote from Heidelberg from the end of World War II. The ship was sunk just in time to provide for months this Neckar fat during the really hungry times, and people were eating it. I would like to eat some walnuts, but seems that there is nothing left here. What a pity. Yeah, a lot of farmers actually don't like those fruit trees or nut trees inside the fields. As you can see, he is plowing and sowing this part of the field, but nothing is growing here. So basically, like on 70, 80 square meters, the size of a small apartment in this field actually has no value for the farmer, except if he comes and collects the nuts faster than all the walkers who walk around here. So a lot of the farmers remove those trees from the fields. There are laws against this, but the laws are not too strict. So in older times, basically having a field and having fruit trees on the field, and maybe having fruit trees, and under the fruit trees having grapevines, and under the grapevines having a wheat or vegetable field was practical. But now for modern agriculture, polycultures are not so favored. So I guess, I don't know what this green mark on the tree means. Does it mean that they will cut it, or does it mean that it's allowed to stay right now? I don't know, but basically for the farmer this tree is just lost revenue. Oh, pokeweed. Yeah, pokeweed is a horrible invasive. This one is the American species. Yeah, it showed up here much later than the Asian species. It's more toxic than it. You can eat the young stems, like the rednecks in Eastern North America used to eat them and even sell them on the markets. They are highly toxic. They are like fugu. If you don't prepare them right, you die. But this was not introduced here for the stems, despite the fact that in different parts of Bulgaria and Spain and other parts of Europe, the big and soft leaves are being used for food. In Bulgaria, they wrap meat or rice in them. I forgot what they do in Spain or Portugal, but they use them for something. So you can use the toxic leaves, which don't seem to be too toxic in small amounts. You can use the young stems, which are very toxic, so you shouldn't. The main reason they were introduced were the berries. Those purple berries with the purple sap. You know, when you are an artisanal winemaker and you use like the natural yeasts of which fly around in the air, and you use dirty equipment, and so often your wine doesn't turn out very good. And often your wine turns out brown. Once, when I visited my Bulgarian girlfriend's family, their wine turned out brown. We still drank it throughout the winter. But look at that. Ain't that a perfect natural solution? You just mix the sap of the juice of those berries into the wine and make it red. That's why it was introduced in Europe. To make wine which had turned brown, red. Beautiful red again. Unfortunately, a lot of customers died. So nowadays you're only allowed to use artificial color to make your brown wine red. You are not allowed to use this natural color anymore, because it will kill the people who drink your wine. By the way, like with so many other of those little toxic berries, they are not toxic for birds. And of course they are not intended to be for humans. They didn't evolve together with humans, they evolved together with birds, so birds eat them, and for them they are not toxic, so birds disperse this. That's why it's so invasive. But humans couldn't disperse it so well. Well, actually they could eat a handful of those, walk a mile or two, die, and then you dispersed it, and you also provide it with a lot of fertilizer. Cherry plums. Those were not planted for cherry plums, I guess. Probably this was a blue plum, a row of blue plums here. I don't even think this was intended as a hedgerow. A row of blue plums, then the blue plum stems broke down. Yeah, I cannot find a single one. They were all grafted on cherry plums because cherry plums are much more hardy. And then the cherry plums grew out of the roots around the collapsed stems, and then they also made suckers and seedlings. Most of those young ones are suckers, they're coming from the roots. So that's how a lot of those cherry plum hedges here in the Rhine Valley and throughout Europe basically got created from old blue plum or other domestic plum plots. Now they're of course very important for wildlife. Here in this area, the nature conservation agencies, they are managing some of those hedges for wild, what was it, quail or some other of those huntable birds. And of course you can also forage tons of cherry plums, and if some farmer tells you that you are stealing, in this case, no, you are not really stealing because this is an abandoned overgrown plot. I am always meticulously checking those mixtures which were put here just to improve the soil. There are a lot of plants which are specifically harvested for those mixtures, like for example this Phacelia here, which is also very good for bees, or also the turnips. But often they don't clean those seed collections so well, because why should they? They all often use a lot of residue or refuse from seed batches which have been cleaned very well. We have a lot of big mills around here in Mannheim and Ludwigshafen, a lot of big oil mills and corn mills, and for over 100 years the farmers around here, they collected the trash from those mills because it was basically lots of seeds and biomass. Often they fed it to the chickens, which could die if there were some toxic seeds inside, but then they threw it on the fields as fertilizer because it was free or very cheap fertilizer. And so a lot of strange plants cropped out on those fields which were fertilized with random seed mixtures. So a lot of botanists used to walk those fields for 100 years and check what rare stuff they could find. And if you're lucky, some of this stuff will even be forageable. Oh yeah, some other people are foraging on the potato field. I don't mind, yeah. They're doing some minor damage by trampling the field, but also they're utilizing all the potatoes, which would go to waste otherwise. So I totally approve of it. And now I'm also far enough so that nobody can recognize them from the video. If you wonder what they are to the left of the biggest electricity pole. Actually, collecting stuff on fields after the harvest used to be a very important survival tactic for thousands of years. I think in the Bible or in the Talmud they somewhere describe it, and even, yeah, often people would hire strong people for the harvest, like to cut the grain or collect the potatoes or such stuff. And then there would be stuff which was lying around, which was just not really worth collecting for those big farmers who had hundreds or thousands of acres. And then poor people, often old people, widows and orphans and so would come. And often the single things, well, of course it wasn't as plentiful as this cornfield or this potato field over there. They are watching me, they think I'm filming them now. Nah, I'm not a German, I'm not gonna snitch on them. So basically those people collecting the grains or other things on the field, sometimes we know we know how much money one of those strong people employed in the harvest used to earn, and we know how much one of those weaker widows, orphans, old people used to carry home every day when they collected the single the single cobs of corn or potatoes or cobs of wheat or so, and often they would make as much or even more money, or they could get more grain than the actual harvesters could get with their salary from the harvesting. So basically, yeah, and in many societies this was also kind of a right of people, like the government, the society knew that you have to forage stuff which was left behind by the large scale harvesting. A lot of people relied on this and would die without it. Also, it seems the Peking duck originated this way, because the original Peking duck was like poor people would collect the remaining grains of rice on the rice fields. The ducks would do the same, and then when the poor people managed to kill a duck, they would bake it into an oven, often with some of the rice they collected. And this is the original Peking duck. So the Peking duck was actually also originated from those fields, from this foraging on fields which have already been harvested. Also, there's some story about some woman who was collecting some story in the Bible about some woman who was collecting those grains left on the field of a rich man, and then her mother told her to basically, she might be old, but she's not that old, so she should basically make herself pretty and seduce the rich man. At the end, she even managed to marry him. I don't remember the story. Look it up. It's in the Bible. Nice. They had the big heavy bag of potatoes. Well, I totally approve of this, and this must have been going on for weeks, and it can go on for many more weeks until we get some harsh frosts where the potatoes get too green. I used to do this also when I was young, and I know totally respectable, well-earning Germans who did it too, for a very simple reason. In Germany, very early, very young, very small potatoes are very expensive, but mostly the farmers don't harvest them because there is not a big demand for very small, very expensive potatoes. But a lot of Germans would go there and collect the tiny potatoes after the harvest, because in Germany they are considered of superior quality. In other countries they are considered of inferior quality. Actually, when I was in Malta, the farmers told me they get very little amount for their potatoes, like 20-25 cents for big ones, and like sometimes 2-3 cents for the small ones, which they often harvest in January and February. Back then Malta was still not in the EU, but was kind of due to become a member. I told them, folks, a good tip from me: in Germany, in April or May, those tiny potatoes, they go for many euros a kilo. Actually, they can go for 10-15 euros a kilo, and you here are getting 2 or 3 cents. You have a very small scale production, but a very early production because you're a subtropical country. Bring the stuff to Germany, those really cheap potatoes, you can make an insane profit. Couple grapevines. Traditionally, the wine growing areas, as I told you, they were not in the lowlands, not in the mountains, but in the foothills of the mountains. And this is doing quite well without any pesticides. So, well, it's not a real fox grape, but it could be some no, it's not Oberlin either. Must be some fox grape hybrid, because most grapevines wouldn't survive that well without fertilizer. Here also a topinambur. And another topinambur is much more common here around Mannheim than around Heidelberg, because it comes from a continental climate in the Mississippi basin. Climate is more similar to the climate of Mannheim. In Heidelberg, the climate used to be too wet in the mountains, too much rain. So very little topinambur, but around here it's a wheat. Topinambur, if you don't know what it is, it's a type of sunflower where you don't eat the seeds, you actually eat the tubers, which will make you fart.